Catan is a great game. The first time you play it, there's something spellbinding about it that compels you to play it again and again. So many people call it a gateway game. And it's true. Many of my friends, and myself included, played Catan first. And then I played Dominion and Puerto Rico and Agricola and Seven Wonders and, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, Catan is only the beginning. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the attributes of Catan that make it so interesting and games that share some of those characteristics but may even be better. So before we jump into the top 10 games that are better than Catan, I want to talk a little bit about the attributes of Catan that make it so interesting. I usually rate games on 5 attributes: theme, mechanics, luck, strategy, and complexity. Catan has the following profile. It has, in my opinion, a 3 for theme, an 8 for mechanics, an 8 or 9 for luck, a 4 for strategy, and a 3 for complexity. So what's interesting about that profile is the high mechanics and luck score. I give it a high mechanics score because the game is rather ingenious in the way it keeps everybody engaged throughout the entire game. This was the first game that I ever played where I didn't have to wait for my turn before I could do something. Every single round, people are rolling dice. You have to pay attention in order to claim the goods that you produce, and then you even have the opportunity to trade with the active player. Plus, added to that is that element of luck, which means that it's, at any given point, anybody's game. And while it may be frustrating that sometimes you can just lose because of bad die rolls, you also have the opportunity to think about probabilities and strategize how you're going to build your route in order to maximize your income every single round. Plus, there's a high degree of interaction as players try to team up against each other as somebody comes into the lead, and overall, it makes a really fun experience, even if it's not very complex or strategic, or even if the cards are a little bit meaningless and abstract with sheep and wheat and why does it take 2 things to make whatever. It doesn't really matter what else is happening. The game is all about the mechanics and luck. If you're interested in this, how games are rated based on their attributes, be sure to check out my website, theperfectboardgame.com, where not only you can check out games like this, but you can also buy this t-shirt, which is actually a hand-drawn shirt by none other than me. I spent hours drawing over 100 game components to make this shirt. So, if that sounds cool to you, check that out on my website or look at the link in the description of this video. The shirt is on sale as of right now, actually. This is my first video since I received this, my version of my shirt. So, before we get started, let's talk about the criteria for this list, because it can't just be top 10 games. If it was, I would call it top 10 games. It's top 10 games that are better than Catan. So that means they have to share some characteristic. They have to be comparable to Catan in some way. So all of these games have lower complexity. They're all very easy to teach. They have a higher degree of luck than most games that I would recommend, but that's because I think luck is an essential attribute that makes Catan so attractive in the first place. And then all of them have fantastic mechanics. Some of them have better strategy scores, which is probably why I think they're better, and some of them have better theme scores. But that's what we're looking for in this list, so with that being said, let's begin. At number 10 is Mountain Goats. Mountain Goats is a short little game for 2 to 4 players in which players take turns rolling dice to move their goats up to the top of the mountain. Once they reach the top of the mountain, they can continue to earn points until one of the opponent goats dethrones them and knocks them back down to the bottom. Throughout the entire game, players are competing both to get their own points while dethroning one another when another mountain goat sits on high for too long. It's easy to learn, easy to play, and has an excellent luck element as you pair dice together in order to decide which mountain to move up on. Number 9 is a very underrated card game in my opinion. The game is innovation. In innovation, players are playing cards that represent new technologies. And as they play more cards, they gain more and more abilities, which they can either share with competing civilizations that have similar technology, or they can use to dominate one another. On every turn, a player must decide whether they want to use the technology of their existing cards or draw more cards in order to invest in newer and possibly better technologies. Number 8 is a classic game that really draws on that element of player-to-player sabotage. The game is Pompeii. In Pompeii, players play cards in order to place their civilians into the city of Pompeii. They do this for the whole first phase of the game until Mount Vesuvius erupts, during which they take turns evacuating their civilians as quickly as possible. The really fun thing about Pompeii, though, is that as you place lava tiles, when you place those lava tiles on top of an opponent, or even yourself for that matter, you get to take all of those civilians and throw them into the volcano, which is actually hilarious. And if you like moving the thief around, I think you would really enjoy a game like Pompeii. Number 7 is a game that depends heavily on effective luck mitigation and also involves dice. The game is Railroad Inc. In Railroad Inc., 4 dice are rolled, and all players use the face-up side of each of the die to plan out a route of highways and train tracks. There are certain placement rules for highways that have to be connected to other highways and train tracks being connected to train tracks, but the objective is to connect as many exits as possible while avoiding errors. Errors being any route that hits a dead end without connecting to a station. In order to do this effectively, you really have to draw your routes in such a way to leave possibilities available in case you hit some bad luck later on. The next game, like Catan, has a modular board where the pieces are laid out differently, possibly for every single game, and has very careful route planning, which is interrupted by player-to-player interference. The game is Istanbul. In Istanbul, you move around a city completing different actions in different locations. The catch is the only way to perform an action is to either drop off an assistant or pick up an assistant. This means the game requires very careful planning, as if you are ever left without an assistant, you essentially lose a turn if you can't reach another assistant to pick up. That gets even harder when, if an opponent is in a space that you wish to go, you have to pay them money to land at that space. So, what other players do is very important. I also put this game on this list because I love the element of luck, how you draw cards, and the cards can give you certain abilities that you can play at just the right moment, much like many of the cards in Catan, whether it's the knight card or some of the building cards. And then there's die rolls that are used in the tea house or in the black market, and so there is quite a bit of luck involved, and the game ultimately terminates when one player reaches a certain number of victory points, which in this game are measured by the number of gems that they collect over the course of the game. It can be really exciting when somebody pulls off a really effective move using a combination of cards and careful planning and is able to surprise everyone by ending the game earlier than they anticipated. So an element of Catan that hasn't really been addressed in any of the games I've discussed so far is the alliances that are formed between players, especially as one player takes the lead. Everyone can trade with each other until somebody rises up above the rest, and then suddenly it's all, don't trade with that guy, right? So in that same vein is game 5 on this list. The game has been around for a really long time. It's canon. It's also one of the first games that I played after playing Catan, that is. And the game is Cosmic Encounter. In Cosmic Encounter, players are alien races, and they are competing for building the most foreign colonies. They do this by flipping over cards from the Destiny deck. It's the Destiny deck that tells you who you are going to attack. And then, once an encounter is plotted, both the attacker and the defender are given the opportunity to invite alliances. Now, as you can imagine, in the beginning, why wouldn't you ally with one person or another person? Everyone's got 0 points, it's all good, but as the game goes on and as somebody shoots out above the rest, the alliance phase of Cosmic Encounter can become a really big deal and very, very exciting, as well as, not to mention, the alien powers that allow each player to modify the rules of the game in a very unique way. It really is a classic Cosmic Encounter. Number 4 exercises the same very successfully implemented mechanic from Catan, that of simultaneous dice rolling. The game is Dice Forge, and the big difference between Catan and Dice Forge, aside from there not being a map, is that while in Catan all players are affected by 2 dice, in Dice Forge every individual player has their own 2 dice. On a player's turn, every player rolls their 2 dice and picks up the resources on the face of the dice, and then the active player gets to perform an action. One action is to perform heroic feats and to use their resources to get victory points. Or, the more exciting action, and what gives the game its name, is the ability to buy dice faces and forge them to your dice, therefore modifying your probability for the rest of the game. Not only is Dice Forge brilliant in mechanics and luck like Catan, but it also has some of the finest component quality of any game I've ever bought for the cost, which is only about $40 incredibly. So I highly recommend it, especially if you like the tactile experience of rolling dice. The game is Dice Forge. Number 3 is like Catan in 2 ways. One is it's a simple game with an economy where the resources vary in value during the course of the game. And the second thing is it has excellent replay value and can feel like every single game is very, very different depending on how players interact with each other. So the game is Raccoon Tycoon. In Raccoon Tycoon, there are so many objectives to the game. On one hand, you can buy buildings which will give you certain victory points for satisfying various conditions. You can also build railroads which will give you more points as you collect more railroads of the same type. Or you can build towns. But while all of this is happening, there's an ever-shifting economy of resources. To gain resources, you must play a card, and every card you play alters the price of other resources, and that means the game is all about timing. On your turn, is it best to sell very valuable resources, or is it best to start an auction for another train line? The important thing shifts based on how your opponents and you play together. That makes it very interesting for me to play multiple times, and I also think that without having to get into a heavier game like Brass or something like that, this game has a really fun economy that doesn't have a high learning curve to get into. And that game is Raccoon Tycoon. Number 2 is a brand new game. It came out this year. I just got my copy from Europe, and I'm very excited about it because it's so fun. It is the kind of game that is undeniably full of luck and yet so much fun to play over and over again. It has just the right amount of luck and analysis trying to optimize your turn. The game is Explorers. It's a little hard to find, so if you're searching for it, you can specify the designer, Phil Walker Harding, or you can check out the link in this description. Now, to explain Explorers, I would like to say that it's a game that's a lot like Kingdom Builder, but fixes all of the flaws. Now, if you've never played Kingdom Builder, I'll just describe how to play the game. All players have an identical map. It's a grid of squares, and they all start in the same location, and they must explore the map by crossing off 2 or 3 squares using a dry erase marker. The squares they can cross off are determined by the terrain type, again like Kingdom Builder, but it's determined by a card flip that affects everybody. Points are earned by putting X's on different areas of the land, but in order to do this effectively, you have to really carefully plan how you're going to make your way across different regions. I really like the game because it's so easy to learn and play, and the element of luck provides just enough challenge to really make you think without taking the game too seriously, and while giving everybody a really even chance of possibly winning. It's not just some pure strategy game where always the best player is the most experienced player. Not to mention there are, goodness gracious, hundreds of ways to change the gameplay by using different objectives for scoring. So again, brand new, excellent designer, the game Explorers. And finally, number 1, my favorite entry-level board game that shares characteristics with Catan. The game is Via Nebula, and the designer is Martin Wallace, who also designed Brass, which I had mentioned earlier. It's a more complex game, but this game is brilliant. In Via Nebula, players take turns taking actions that will help them collect resources to build buildings in order to earn victory points and win the game. Much like Catan. The only difference is that whereas in Catan you're rolling dice, in Via Nebula there are no dice at all. In fact, Via Nebula has a lower luck rating than any other game in this entire list. But what makes it incredible, and what I think it embodies, that is also my very favorite thing about Catan, is that in Catan, right, in the beginning of the game when all the little tokens are on the board, you sit there and you do your probability analysis, and you think about, okay, well, there's a 5 and an 8, and there's a higher probability of those spaces, but how am I going to get some brick, and there's over here, and I can trade, da-da-da-da. You're doing this whole analysis of the board before you place your first town and your first roads. That element of reading the board is very well exhibited in Explorers, by the way, that I just mentioned, but in Via Nebula is incredible because there are no dice. Instead of analyzing probabilities, what you're analyzing is other player behavior. See, in Via Nebula, players can share the same routes. And the routes are built not with roads, but by making clearings in the clouds. And any player is allowed to move through any other player's clearings. And in this way, the best player is often the player who does the best job of piggybacking on other players' work. I love the element of thinking about where other people are going and what they're trying to do so that you can sort of join them and get in on the action while having to do less work. The game is brilliant. I hope it is just as big a hit at your table. But those are my top 10 board games that are possibly better than Catan. Let me know what you think, and if you have another recommendation, go ahead and write one in the comments. I will leave some links to my other recommendation and list videos, and if you want to check out this incredible shirt, go ahead and take a look. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you will stick around for more content from me. Take care. Bye-bye.